Welcome to the Vantage HR Influencers Podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Vantage Circle, the simple and AI-powered rewards and recognition platform for employee engagement.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion programs are becoming increasingly important in the transformation of businesses today. Especially, the pandemic has prompted a quick shift in inclusive hiring. However, attracting and hiring diverse and inclusive candidates is never enough. Once on board, those employees must feel involved to foster the conditions necessary for their success. As a result, it has generated a unique challenge for executives to comprehend why and how they should be investing in diversity, equity, and inclusion, as many of us still do not see the potential. Hi everyone, I'm your host Sushmita, and in this episode we'll talk about building a diverse and inclusive culture with my guest speaker, Radhika Tomar, HR Director India at Kimberly-Clark. Welcome to the show, Radhika.
Thank you very much, Sushmita. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. I hope you're doing fine as well, Radhika.
Yes.
And thank you for joining me today, for taking your time to join me today.
It's my pleasure, Sushmita. Thank you for having me.
Welcome. So please tell us about yourself, Radhika, your background, experiences, and about your professional journey.
Sure. Before I get into my professional experience, I think it will help if I give you a glimpse of who am I as a person very quickly.
Very true.
I actually grew up across different states in India. My parents were both doctors in the Indian Navy. And so, like any defense kid, we would move around every couple of years to different parts of India. And hence, for me, of our topic of relevance today, diversity kind of was automatically built into my childhood as well, because I experienced living across various different parts of India.
Different parts of India, right.
Yeah. I'm married to Desmond, who I met in business school many, many years ago. I won't tell you how many. I don't want to date myself. But again, we're both from very different parts of the country with different cultures. He's from the south of the country. I'm from the north. He's Christian. I'm Hindu. And so we have a very diverse family as well. And we love and enjoy the diversity, as it comes across in food, in rituals, in traditions, and practices. So we have a really fun time together. We have two little kids. I have a 7-year-old daughter and I have a 3-year-old son. And between them and work and family, I'd say life is quite interesting and quite full of it.
Sounds so, yeah.
Currently based in Mumbai, Sushmita, if I have to tell you a little bit about my professional journey, I currently lead HR at Kimberly-Clark in India across the 3 businesses that we have, our professional, consumer, and then our technology center in Bangalore. Prior to Kimberly-Clark, I was at Dyson for about 4 years. I did a variety of different roles in India, Singapore, and then Australia, where I was based for 2 years just before we moved back to India last year. And then prior to that, I was actually at Microsoft for 5 years. A lot of my learning and experience on inclusion actually comes from the great work they did there. And then the first half of my career, about 7-8 years, I was in consulting. So I was at McKinsey & Company for a while, and then at Hewitt Associates doing organization and people-related consulting work.
Great. So at Kimberly-Clark, Radhika, you are focused on attracting the best-in-class personnel, cultural development, talent management, diversity and inclusion efforts, and the continued growth. So before we get into how you and your team have contributed to your work, could you explain to us briefly about how the concept of diversity, equity, and inclusion has changed since the pandemic, or if you think it has remained the same?
No, I think that it has changed tremendously, and I'll talk about what my view is on how it's changed. So the pandemic actually, many people say that the pandemic was a great equalizer because all of us were in the same boat for the last 2 years.
Right.
While I agree to some extent, but I actually like to rephrase that and look at it a little differently. I think we were all in the same storm, but we all had different boats. Some of us had, bigger, sturdier, stronger boats that with a lot of support, and that took us through all of the, different parts of the storm. Some of us had smaller boats, which perhaps we had to row on our own and didn't have any help with. So, we were all in different boats, but yes, we experienced the world, with the same view for the last 2 years. So I think that in itself, that realization that all of us, through our virtual Zoom calls, all of us opened up our personal lives to each other at work. That itself gave us an understanding or a peek into how each other's boats are and what are the different issues, what are the different conditions, that people are working with and still being productive and still bringing their best to work.
Right.
So at a personal level, I think all of us have been forced to reflect on our choices, and many of us have reclaimed our lives. I think that's a great victory for all of us as individuals, not necessarily as professionals.
Right.
We've really made different choices, and I love that we've expanded what is meaningful to us in our lives apart from just work. So I think that's at the personal level. If I think about the organizational level, right, Sushmita, I feel like the last 2 years have completely changed the talent dynamics. And because of that, organizations have been forced to look at inclusion and flexibility completely differently. So I'll give you an example. We have in Kimberly-Clark, the largest tech center for KC situated in Bangalore. And over the last 2 years, our talent pool has just expanded. We haven't had to limit ourselves to Bangalore. So we've hired a lot of great talent outside of Bangalore as well. And today we're in a situation where almost 50% of our people at that center work outside Bangalore. And so we've had to really think deep and hard about how do we create policies where we can, where we can make sure we're including all of this expanded talent pool in KC, and how we're providing flexibility so that we continue to be productive. So I think for organizations, they've had to really rethink their approach because talent dynamics have changed.
Right.
I was saying another organization level change that I think I've noticed is that, leaders have been people everywhere, but specifically because leaders are in a place of privilege and typically have a lot of resources and access to resources that comes with that privilege. I think leaders have been forced to forego privilege for a short period of time. In India, I remember, I don't know if you ever saw it, but I remember the meme that was circulated, when lockdown just started, which said, to all our CEOs, startup founders, directors in boards, CFOs, etc., aaj bartan dho liye kya, which means have washed your utensils today. And I think that, that creating that platform or that equalizer where all of us had to forego any privileges that we were working with, opened up everyone's mind to really kind of understand each other's situation. So that's at an organization level. I think for the world at large, what has been really heartening to see is that there has been a collective global effort
very true.
to try and be as inclusive as you can in your efforts to help people. I've seen that, when I talked about different boats, I've seen a collective effort in different forms and that people are making to at least put lifesavers or at least put flotation devices in every boat, if not, make everyone's boat bigger. So that has been really heartening to see.
Yeah. So basically it has become a core business priority for every leadership team.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So how do you collaborate and elevate this commitment with your team at Kimberly-Clark for creating an inclusive workplace? What are the initiatives that you have taken up?
Yeah, I think KC actually is one of those organizations that has a very, very strong commitment towards not only having a gender equal workforce. So we have external commitments that we've made about being a gender neutral workforce.
Yeah, I was reading an article where I saw some of the recognition that KC has received. I think for 2021 Best Companies for Multicultural Women by Seramount.
Yes.
Then 2020 plus Top Companies by Executive Women by Working Mother Media.
Yes.
And also in the Forbes 2021 list, right?
That's
for America's best employers for diversity.
That's right. And the Forbes one is really kind of close to our heart. But all of them are important recognitions, right? So I think Casey is very committed. We've made an external, just like we have on other business goals, whether it's growth, whether it's profitability, whether it's sustainability. On diversity as well, we've made an external and a commitment to our board on a gender-neutral workforce. And to support that, we have a very well-structured framework to make the workplace more inclusive. Okay, so we look at it in four aspects, Sushmita. The first one is about creating community.
Okay.
So how do we create a group of people, that have common aspects that they can identify with, and how do we enable those groups to deepen understanding of those causes and kind of activating action towards the causes that they want to advocate for. So one is that creation of community.
So are these people from the HR team, or it can be from any team?
So when I say creating community, it's really about bringing different groups of people together. So for example, many of our countries globally have women inclusion networks. Many of our countries have LGBTQ ERGs. Many of our countries have ERGs for people with disability, people of color. So I think that is what I meant when I said creating community, so that we can understand those groups, or we can have a common understanding of those groups, and then they drive a lot of initiatives to to make it a vibrant community for themselves.
Okay, understood. Right.
So that's one aspect. The second one is really leveraging leadership, and over there, Casey is one of the companies that really holds its leaders to a very high standard and makes them accountable for building diverse teams. The third pillar for us really is how do we empower employees, and that's really about how do you create a shared understanding, how do you sensitize people, and how do you, within your processes itself, define your processes in a way that you are becoming more diverse and inclusive. So for example, the way our recruitment process is designed, at different checkpoints in that recruitment funnel, do we have checks for diversity, whether it's at the initial sourcing stage, at the interview stage, at the final offer stage. When it comes to talent management, and we've started a fairly robust succession planning process, which is focused on making sure we're being inclusive even when we're looking at successors, whether it's women, whether it's Asians, whether it's people of color. And then, career development. So across all of these processes, we've really embedded kind of diversity checks and balances to make sure that we're empowering people to really do their best and grow to their potential. And then the last pillar, Sushmita, is about accelerating action. And that's about fundamentally policies, and it's about sensitization. And there we have a whole host of programs that we run for managers, for individual contributors. We have things like Global Inclusion Week, Power Days. We have rewards and recognition. And so we do a lot to sensitize our people. And we also, have started to take a very hard look when it comes to policies, whether it's, gender pay parity, or whether it's our benefits or working or hybrid working policies that are designed to be inclusive.
Yeah, so Radhika, speaking out about diversity might be uncomfortable for a lot of people, isn't it? But for leaders who want to seriously want to build a diverse and inclusive workplace, it's one skill that is highly critical. So would you like to give some tips to those leaders who want to overcome their anxiety about discussing diversity and inclusion in the workplace?
No, that's a really good question, Sushmita. And I think many of us have had our own learning curve and have been on our own journey over the last few years on this, right? So I think the first step is kind of research, and educate yourself, right? So, and many of us might have probably done this, but if you ask people, for example, how do you define a simple term like privilege, which is an important part of recognizing bias and inclusion, you will find a lot of people have different answers. Just because we're on the topic, my favorite answer is actually the one that John Amici said, which is privilege is not the presence of an advantage; it's actually the absence of an impediment. So, if you haven't had something bad happen to you, you would never notice it, and that's a really nice way of looking at it. But coming back to it, I think the first one is educate yourself, research, immerse yourself in research. The second step is, do you have a partner, a coach, somebody that who can help you identify truly your own biases? Is there a way in which you can get feedback or sit down and say, okay, in the past, these are possible biases that I have been party to, either I have or I have seen happen. Recognize them, give a name to them, call them out, even if it is to just to yourself. So research tells us that the moment you start to recognize privilege and bias, and if you put a name and face to it, instead of just unknown examples, your ability to be comfortable with that and reflect on that increases significantly. The third thing I'd say is spend time building your own capability. So again, many organizations have bias training and inclusion training. Again, research tells us that the impact of bias training improves significantly the longer you immerse yourself in it. So, you must be knowing, Sushmita, what do you think is the average time that leaders spend in inclusion training or bias training?
I would like to know that.
So usually most organizations will, have a 2-hour, 3-hour kind of training where they talk about unconscious bias and they talk about kind of inclusion. Actually, research tells us that you need to spend at least 18 to 24 hours to truly uncover the complexity of bias and inclusion. And leading organizations have their leaders go through almost a 3-day immersive bias training. That really makes them comfortable, makes them educated about the topic. So I think that's the foundation of it.
Right.
The second part of it is just being comfortable, being uncomfortable, right? And not letting fear of saying the wrong things keep you from trying. I don't know if you remember, but a few years ago when Satya Nadella had just become CEO at Microsoft, he was at a large global diversity conference and they were talking about women in the workplace and growing women in the workplace. And he said a line which was something to the effect of, women shouldn't feel the need to ask for promotions. You should let your work speak for itself and karma will take care of the rest. And I remember that he got a lot of flack for that statement because there are so many things wrong with that statement, right? And for months after that, the international press and the international media gave him a lot of flack about it. But that didn't stop him from continuing his journey on inclusion, right? I'd say Microsoft is actually now one of the leading organizations when it comes to inclusive practices and processes and policies on inclusion. So even the best falter sometimes, and that's okay. I remember he issued an apology a few days later and explained what he actually meant. And that's okay. If the CEO of one of the biggest companies globally can make mistakes, so can you. So being comfortable, being uncomfortable, educate yourself as much as you can, spend time on learning about those topics. And then the last thing I'll say is, Sushmita, I know it's a little bit of a long-winded answer, but the last thing that's important is think about not only in your workplace, but in your personal life. How are you introducing diversity? Yeah, I mean, in the metros today, if I think about senior executives, right, in the corporate world, most of us will live in certain condominiums, certain societies, where actually we are interacting with just clones of ourselves. Everyone living in those societies are people like you. They have the same lifestyle, they do the same jobs. Many of them even, would have gone to the same list of 30 institutes in the country. So, and I feel that's a big lost opportunity. So even in your personal life, think about where you are living, how you can introduce diversity in your life, what classes are your children going to? So for example, are you sending your kid to the most elite football club in the country, or are you actively trying to build diversity into their activities and sending them to a local neighborhood football class, which actually has a whole bunch of different children that come to that class. Does your children's school have people with disabilities? And these are the small things that you can start doing to truly embrace diversity in your personal life.
Yeah. In your personal and then in your professional life.
Absolutely.
That would make it more meaningful.
Absolutely.
For sure. Right. So moving on, Radhika, we have all heard about the Great Resignation this year, and it has been been a trend in workplaces and social media, and it is in fact expected to continue. So however, it is said that well-intended and implemented diversity, equality and inclusion efforts can help workplaces retain their best talents. So how do you believe we can make a difference with this opportunity?
Yeah, I think the Great Resignation and the pandemic in general has, like I was saying, has forced organizations to rethink their approach to flexibility and inclusion, right? So I think today, flexibility has become a table stake. We all know that most of us would like to have much more control, much more flexibility in the way we work, where we work, what hours we work. And so I don't think I'd be wrong if I said that most organizations globally are now embracing some form of hybrid working. The extent of that is different, but I think the fact that we've had an opportunity because of the Great Resignation to rethink the way we work is just an amazing opportunity. So I think if you're not rethinking the future of work or the way you work, you've already lost your best talent. That's one. The second one, I think, is just the way you look at different talent pools. As an organization, as people are leaving, have you systematically sat down and explored talent pools that you may not have thought of before? So either locationally agnostic, so if you were hiring in one particular city, now that we have flexibility, can we expand that to different cities? Or, even in general, when was the last time that you looked at where you're hiring from? So I'll give you an example, right? Most FMCGs in India have big field sales force organization, and most of them hire traditional salespeople, many of them from competitor organizations, grown through the ranks, and we have a very standard way of hiring these sales executives and sales officers. But how come no one has explored other industries or actually very different talent who we think might do good in sales? So for example, there have been so many of these big unicorn startups, and I can think of many, right? And Oyo, Ola, Baiju, so many of these organizations have built big sales forces and have taught youngsters how to sell and how to engage and how to influence external stakeholders. Why have FMCG companies not started to embrace that kind of talent and bring them into FMCG sales? Similarly, I was reading another research that said that in the insurance collection industry, a global company did a study, and guess which kind of talent was the most successful? Actually, bartenders, because bartenders have the ability to talk to people, to get people to open up. And so when you call somebody to ask details about, okay, how did you hurt yourself, or how did you hurt your car, or what happened in the accident, so they can assess the insurance claim, bartenders have the most success. So I feel that given we're in this Great Resignation, it's such a competitive war for talent, it's an opportunity for us to really rethink our talent pools and embrace diverse talent pools. And then the last thing I'll say is that if you haven't as yet examined whether you are paying men and women or different diverse groups at the same levels, then this issue is going to impact not just resignation, but engagement, growth, and careers of, how many women you see as leaders in the future. So I think that's table stakes. I can't remember the last time an Indian company actually published gender pay parity numbers. I think it's time in India that we start to take responsibility for that and start working towards that.
Great, Radhika. Thank you for sharing your insights today. And before we sign out from here, is there anything you want to say or any advice that you have for leaders who want to be more inclusive?
Yeah, some of the things that we have talked about, but a few things still come to mind. So, for example, many of us lead large teams as senior leaders, or even if we lead small teams. One of the blockers to inclusion and making the most out of diverse ideas is people not wanting to speak up. Yeah, all of us have team members in our teams who are quieter, who don't easily say things, don't easily voice their opinions, especially in the Indian ways of working. Hierarchy is kind of respected a lot. But actually we are harming ourselves, we're harming innovation, we're not letting the best ideas come forth. And so I think one habit that leaders can start creating almost immediately is examining whether you're creating psychological safety in your team. Yeah. What kind of environment are you creating so that people feel safe to voice their ideas and voice their thoughts?
Their creative juices.
Correct. And one of the big ways of creating psychological safety, Sushmita, is to destigmatize failure. So be vulnerable yourself. Talk about times when you failed. If you made a mistake, say sorry, call it out. And just that act itself will create a safer environment for different people in your team to speak up. So I think that's one.
It's okay to fail.
Yeah. It's okay to fail.
And admit it.
The other one is, like I said, how actively are you introducing diversity in your personal life? Think about how actively are you introducing diversity in your professional life. So most of us typically like to live in what I call echo chambers. Okay, so we have the same set of people. When we have an idea, we talk to them, they give us feedback, which is typically our boss, one or two of our peers, maybe a friend, maybe a colleague or two outside our immediate group, right? But what we haven't realized is that we are creating almost an echo chamber for ourselves where where they will give us or make us hear what we want to hear so that we can move forward on those ideas, right? Because it's a safe environment for us. There are people who want to see me succeed and who are invested in my agenda. How actively are you seeking perspective outside your echo chamber? And how systematically are you finding a way to do this? Is one of the tips that I've started to do and advise a lot of leaders on. So many companies have done it systematically. One example is Gucci, who were having few years ago really stagnated growth, and because they were trying to expand into e-commerce and digital, they actually employed digital natives, the youngsters, on their board to advise them on how to do that. So they systematically brought in diversity. That's at a very high level. At a simple level, I love a practice that Microsoft used to do, where they used to encourage leaders to practice something called 8 cups of coffee. So they used to say, every quarter have 8 cups of coffee with people that you wouldn't have interacted with otherwise, whether it's in person or a virtual coffee. And all leaders were encouraged to do this. And this really helped us break out of our standard set of people or our standard echo chamber that we interacted with. And the last one, Sushmita, is to check yourself on how you're distributing work in your team. As team leaders, all of us have standard go-to people. We always have the same 1 or 2 people that when we have a task, when we have an opportunity, when we have a project, we'll go to those people. The next time you find yourself, and there's a good reason for that. They do great work. They deliver things fast. They may already have experience working in that area. So they're all good reasons why we have these couple of go-to people. But what we're realizing is that then we are actively excluding the others from taking up these opportunities
who might
or learn,
are equally efficient,
and we are impeding their learning. If you never give them an opportunity, they will never learn, right? So check yourself on how you're distributing work. If you're nervous about outcomes, pair people up, pair your go-to person with somebody you wouldn't normally go to, so that both can have the learning. Find ways to distribute work more equitably. So I think these are 2-3 very small things that we can start doing today.
So knowing and understanding the topic today from our brief conversation, our audience might want to engage with you further, Radhika. Would you like to tell us how our listeners can reach out to you for that?
Yeah, sure. So I'm available on LinkedIn. You can easily find me, Radhika Tomar. I work at Kimberly-Clark in India. And I'd be more than happy to connect with any of our listeners and chat and have a dialogue, help, or brainstorm in any way I can.
Thank you, Radhika. I sincerely appreciate you for taking your time to join me today. And thank you so much for generously sharing your expertise. We look forward to welcoming you again here in the Vantage HR Influencers podcast.
Thank you very much, Sushmita. It was lovely to talk to you, and I hope to continue chatting in the future.
Thanks for listening to the Vantage HR Influencers podcast. Please do subscribe to Vantage HR Influencers podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and our YouTube channel for new episodes.